Hello everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to go over how to do this technique for brick stitching around a hoop or a frame. And in today's class we're going to be using a round frame. Here are a couple of examples of pieces that I've done using this technique. As an added bonus, I'm going to show you how to add this embellishment here along the edge of the frame, and it pretty much camouflages the whole bead frame. It's a lovely technique, and once I figured out how to do it, I just thought, wow, that really just changes the whole look of this type of beadwork. And so I've added it to this earring project. The first pair of earrings that I did like this did not have that, and there's a picture of that you've seen, as an introduction to the class. But this is how we're going to do it today. And I really think it's a really beautiful technique. I love using brick stitch around a frame and around a bead. It's a great technique to add a lot more, opportunities to your beadwork and design elements. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the materials together that you're going to need for the class, and we'll go ahead and get started. Well, welcome back. So now we're going to go over the materials list that we'll need to make a pair of earrings. So the first thing you're going to need are two round hoop components. And the ones I'm using are 30 millimeter. You can use any size you want, but for the amount of telos here used on the embellishment, I suggest the 30 millimeter. You'll need two ear wires, and you're going to need two 4 millimeter jump rings. Then we're going to need some seed beads. We'll need some size 8 seed beads, and the ones I'm using are Higher Metallic Amethyst by Toho. And my lighting doesn't really show you the beautiful color so well of these beads or this finished project. So I'll try to get some pictures up along to show you the more realistic color in the light. Now, we need some size 11 seed beads. I'm going to be using Jet Opaque by Toho. And also, I'll be using Gold Lustered Raspberry. They're also by Toho. All my seed beads about it are. You'll need a very few of the size 15-0 Jet Opaque seed beads. And those are just used here on the loop to connect the ear wire at the top. You won't need many of those. And you'll need, for the two earrings, you'll need 16 telas. These are made by Mayuki of Japan. They're 5 millimeter tela beads with the 2 holes on them. And the ones I'm using are rose luster. And you'll need 2 daggers. And I'm using 1-hole daggers today. These are made by Check Glass. The ones I'm using are Amethyst Peacock. You see the little peacock-looking design in there on the bead. You'll just need 2 of those. You can use the 1-hole or 2-hole daggers, and if you use the 2 holes, there's just an extra step to add some embellishment so that you cover up that second hole. You'll also need some fireline, and I suggest that you start out with at least a full wingspan of fireline on your needle. I'm using a size 11 beading needle, and I'm using the black satin fireline. I've already got my fireline threaded onto my needle. A full wingspan is from fingertips to fingertips with your arms completely spread out wide. You're going to need a couple of pairs of pliers to close your jump rings and to add your ear finding. And you're going to need some scissors or a thread burner. Alright, so those are your materials. Go ahead and get everything gathered up and meet me back here and we'll get started. Hi everyone, and welcome back. So I've got my needle threaded here. And we're going to be starting out with our 8-0 seed beads. So go ahead and get a little small pile of those dumped out. The technique we're using is brick stitch around a component or a frame. And so what we need to do in order to start that is to tie onto our frame. I'm going to come out just a little bit. So what I'm doing, I'm going to take the tail end of my thread and I'm going to go through the center of my bead frame. And I'm just going to tie 2 overhand knots to tie my thread right onto my frame. And by adding the second knot, it just makes sure that everything's going to stay nice and secure. Pull everything real tight, and then we can go ahead and start. Now, I'm left-handed, so I will be brick stitching along this frame in this direction. If you're right-handed, you're going to be going in the other way. And if you're unfamiliar with brick stitch around a frame or a bead, I have some free PDF files on my website at thealluringbeadboutique.com that you can access. You just simply have to be a subscriber to my newsletter in order to have access to that material. All right, so in all brick stitch, when we start the first row, we're always going to pick up 2 beads. Now, this is whether you're doing flat brick stitch or brick stitch around some other component. You always pick up 2 to begin with. So I'm picking up 2 of my 8/0s, and I'll let those drop down here on my frame. Now I'm going to take my needle, and I'm going to come through my frame just like that. Now hold on to everything so that my beads can't slip through. Now, I'm going to work left-handed, so I'll be working this side. I'm going to come back up through this bead. If you're right-handed, you'd be coming back up through the bead on the right. When you pull it all through, you see how it stands that bead up on the frame. So there we have, we've done our first stitch. Now we're going to work all the way around this bead frame, and we're only going to use 1 bead at a time. Once you have your initial bead on, your initial stitch of 2 beads, you start back with 1. I'm going to show you how I do brick stitch. I pick up the bead, I stick my needle under, and I put the bead right there between my fingers in the frame. And then I just pull it like this. And that keeps the bead from flopping through to the wrong side. You see I have it right here. Now I'm going to take my needle and go back up through it. Now this saves a step of dropping the bead down and that sort of thing, just a little bit quicker. Now when you're working this, you don't want to pull it so tightly that your beads start pulling out of shape. So you want everything nice and neat without a gap between the beads, but you don't want your beads to start bunching up against each other. So I'm going to show you one more. Let me get my bead in position here. Just like that. And come back through. Just like that. There I have my 4th one. We'll do one more, and then I'm going to go off camera and work my way around and allow you guys to work your way around. I'll show you the other way of just dropping the bead down so you can determine which is easiest for you to do. So this way, you put your bead on, you let it fall down, then you come through your hoop. And you can see it's a little fiddly, but just take your time and you can get this done really easily. It's a very simple stitch. Then you're going to come back up through the bead towards the outside of it. So I'll go ahead and pause right now, and when you get out to a gap of about, say right there, I'll be back and I'll show you how to complete the row. So go ahead and get your first row done. I'm going to give you guys a little quick tip here. You can talk, when I was talking about tension and how to make sure that you're not getting things too tight or too loose, if you'll notice here, I've got quite a bit of my hoop covered now on row 1. And you'll see here that there's no really noticeable gaps in between each of these 8/0 seed beads. And I can tell that I'm not getting my work too tight. If I turn my work this way and look across, roll along the hoop like that, you'll see the beads line up really nicely. If you're getting your tension too tight, you'll have beads that are poking out either to the front or the back. That'll let you know your tension's too tight and that you need to loosen things up a little bit. But if you'll see here, mine are all nice in a nice straight line along the outside edge, facing outward here. And I know that my tension's not too loose because I don't have any noticeable gaps in between the beads this way. All right, so I'll go ahead and finish up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, And I've worked myself around to almost to the very start. I have one more bead to add. And that's why I told you to leave, you know, just a little bit of a gap. Because you're going to have to add this last bead on. Now, my hoop is kind of broken right here. So I'm going to do my best to get this done in a way that I don't have to stop and fiddle with it too awful much. Anyways, I have my last bead here onto my thread. I'm going to go ahead and pull my thread all the way through and let it slide down. Now, I'm going to come through. I'm going to try to cross over here, across my little broken spot there, and do a little troubleshooting while I show you guys what I'm doing. I'm going to pull it through just like I've been doing. Slide it down here into position. I'm going to come right back up through the bead. And if you'll notice, I'm working to try to get this thread to situate on the opposite side of that little connection between the hoop. And so everything worked out great for me because it didn't slip through that little crack. All right, so now we're here, and I need to connect these two beads. You have to do troubleshooting when you're working with brick stitch because of the following reason. You need to determine if you think another bead's going to fit in between these two right here. And I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to try to put another bead in, because if I do, it's going to make it sit outwards like I was talking about earlier. It will poke out to one side or another here of my row, and it's not going to look nice and neat. So I might have a little bit of a gap between the two beads, but I won't have a bead sticking out. So now I'm going to close this up. I need to create a thread bridge. If you'll notice, between each bead along the outside edge here, you have a thread sitting along the top. And that's what you call a thread bridge. And to close the beadwork, we need to create a thread bridge between bead 1 and the very last bead. So come down through the first bead. And just like that, and you're going to pull it together. And I'm going to give mine just a little bit of extra pull because, like I said, I'm trying to close up a little gap. Now I'm just going to go right back up through that last bead and pull my thread all the way through. That's what you call closing the beadwork. And you can see I've pulled it in enough to where I don't have too much of a noticeable gap between the two beads. And so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull this, I'm going to try to pull this little gap together. So I'm going to go down through the second to the last bead and pull. And this is just troubleshooting. All we really needed to do was add the one thread bridge. And now I'm going to go back up through my last bead again. And what I'm doing here is I am just doing a little troubleshooting and closing up a little bit of space. So now all my beads sit nicely, and I don't have too much of a gap between any of my beads. I don't have any beads poking out, and all my beads are in a nice straight line. And that's what I want. Alright, so now we're done with row 1. We need to get into position to do our inside edge row, which is going to be setting these beads along the inside edge. And it's simple to do that. We're just going to pass down through the bead to the left or the right of the bead we're exiting there. So I'm just going to come right down through that bead. I'm going to pull my thread through. And now I'm in position to start working on the inside edge of my beads. Alright, so now I'm just going to go ahead and clean up my 8/0s because I'm done with those for now. And I'm going to get out my Jet Opaque 11/0s. And we'll come back and we'll add row 2. Alright guys, so I'm back. And I've dumped out some of my little Jet Opaque 11/0s right here. And just so I can show you really quickly, row 2 it consists of this row of black beads on the very inside edge of my frame. So my beads are going to be standing up all along the inside silver edge here of this bead frame. And once again, in order to start a row, we are going to be picking up 2 beads. But for adding the inside edge row, this is the way that I work. I put my working thread to the back of my beadwork. I'll go ahead and pick up my 2 black 11/0s and bring them down. And I just let them come up and fall against the bead frame just like that. And you'll see that my working thread is currently sitting right here. And I need to move over. I'm going to come through, try to show you here. I'm passing my needle, scrubbing it along the edge of that bead frame underneath the 8/0 seed beads. And I've skipped over one 8/0 and I'm coming through the next between bead 2 and bead 3 of the 8/0s like that. And I'm going to pull my thread through. I'm going to hold my little black beads up here in place just like that with my finger. So now I can take my needle. I'm going to go through the bead on the left for me, because I'm left-handed, and I'm going to poke the needle, once again, through to the back side of my beadwork. Try not to catch my tail thread here. When I pull, you'll see I've stood that bead up, just like we did on the beginning of row 1. And my working thread here is behind the bead frame. Alright, so let's pick up a bead. And now we're going to bring it down. Let's go ahead and bring it down for now to show you guys again how to do this. Let it come down to the bead frame. So my working thread is behind the frame. My little bead here is sitting right there. I'm using my finger to hold it up. I'm going to come through the next 8/0 seed beads right here along the frame underneath the thread, the outer thread. And when I pull it, I'm going to sit my little bead into position. Well, and now I'm on the front of my bead frame here. You'll see right here, my working thread is here to the front. I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to go through from bottom to top in that 11/0 seed bead and put my working thread towards the back side of the frame again. Pull it through. And snug that bead in. Just like that. And you'll have to take your time with this because you don't want to accidentally be on the wrong side of the bead frame and have your thread catch around and be showing on the outside of the frame like that. So let's do it again. I'm going to go ahead and pick up my bead. Now I'm going to show you the quick way. I'm going to go ahead and poke my needle right through those 2 seed beads right here. Scrubbing on the frame like that. Pull on through and use my finger to hold my black bead there. Now there's my little black bead. My thread is back again on the front of my bead frame. So I'm going to go through the bottom to the top of that black bead towards the back side of the frame again. And there I have my next bead added. Now you'll notice that this first bead is still sitting wonky because we did not fix it to the frame yet. We'll do that at the end, just like we did with our 8/0 seed beads when we close the beadwork. Show you one more. Pick up your 11/0. We're on the back side. We're going to take our needle. We're going to come between the next 2 8/0 seed beads. And just give me a second to wiggle through. Underneath that thread here, the needle should be touching the bead frame. Pull it through. Now my working thread's here on the front. So I know it's time to go through the 11/0 from top to bottom, or bottom to top like that, and poke my working thread to the back side of my bead frame again. And that's what I'm going to keep doing until I've worked myself around. And once again, I'm going to stop shy of leave the little gap for the last bead, and when I come back, I'll show you. We'll add the last bead, and we'll close the beadwork again. All right, so keep adding your 11/0s, and I'll meet you back. All right, so here I am. I'm back, and I've worked my way back around, and I'm going to add. I've got 1 bead on my needle, and we'll come through underneath my bead frame there and pull my little bead into position. And now I need to go back up through from the bottom to the top, and this time I want to make sure that I'm going back to the back side of my bead frame again. Hold on, let me come out just a little. There, that's better. And I'm going to pull that through. And that's going to set my last bead. Hold on just a second, guys. I got my tail thread in there for somehow here. All right. Get that little dude out of the way. So now I have my last bead in position. And now this is my bead 1 right here. I need to go ahead and put my little thread bridge. So I'm going to come down from the top to the bottom. And I'm working from back to front. So my needle and thread are behind my bead frame. So when I push through, I'm pulling to the front. Now I've made my little thread bridge in there. I'm going to go up through that last bead one more time. Working again towards the back. And that's just to tighten things up. Like so. Now I'm going to come right back down through that bead so I can work my way into position to do our next step. So I'm going to come right back from the back towards the front, from top to bottom through that first seed bead. And here we are. There's our cute little frame. And we have our first 2 rows of beads added on the inside and the outside edge. So I'm going to go ahead and take my little thread zapper here, and I'm going to get my tail thread right on out of the way. I'm simply just going to zap it off. You can use scissors or whatever you have to get rid of your tail thread. And that way it won't be causing a problem for our next step. And what we're going to do for our next step, folks, is we are going to add this little row of beads along the frame here. You see how we can see all the silver of the bead frame? Well, we're going to cover that up. And to get into position to do that, we're coming out of the bottom of that bead right there. All I want you to do, I'm going to be working in this direction. So I'm going to come under that first thread bridge there laying up against the side of that bead frame. Just like this. You see that my needle has went under that little threads right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull that thread on through. Alright, so now I'm ready to start adding my raspberry lustered beads. So I'm going to clean up and get these beads out, and we'll be back to add that row. Alright, so I've got a few of my little beads out right here. And I'm ready to go ahead and add this little embellishment on this side of my bead frame. And it's really super simple. When I figured this out, I was tickled to death because I really, in some projects, I wasn't quite digging on the way that the bead frame shows. And you have all these little threads showing exposed on your finished project. So when I figured this out, I thought, God, that's so cool. And it's really super easy. All you got to do is pick up your bead, pick up a seed bead. This is my 11-0 raspberry gold luster. And I've just passed under that thread bridge right there. So I'm going to do, if you'll notice, you're going to have two thread bridges side by side. One was created when we added the 8-0 bead. The next one was created when you add the corresponding 11-0. So go ahead, pick up a bead, then take your needle and stick it under those next two little threads. And it's a little bit fidgety, but it's well worth it. Once you do that, just pull it through. And it sits that little bead right there along the frame. Now on the brick stitch, our bead holes are going this direction. On this particular step, our bead holes are going side to side. Let's do it again. Pick up an 11-0, and then just go ahead and pass through the next two little thread bridges sticking there along the outside of your frame, and pull your bead through. You see how they automatically space themselves out nice and neat. As long as you take your time getting under those threads, they're going to continue to space themselves out nice and neat. Make sure that you're only getting under the two thread bridges that are, situated next to each other from your brick stitch work. Pull your bead into position. We're just going to continue that all the way along till we come towards the end. When we get to the end, I'm going to stop shy so I can show you how to do the last bead. But just keep continuing on like that until you get around and leave yourself about one bead space so I can show you how to properly add that last bead. And we'll be right back. All right, guys. See you in a minute. Alright guys, so here I am, I've working my way back around. You can see I've got all my little beads added nicely around the edge. And now I have this little thread bridge left right here. So I'm going to pick up a bead and go under that thread bridge. Poke myself through there. Pull that bead into position. And now we have to add the last bead. Now, this is part just a little bit tricky, but it's not really too awful hard. Pick your bead up on your needle. Now, what you need to do is you need to poke under the thread bridge here that you initially started from. That's where your thread was exiting, under that same thread bridge. So just go ahead and poke under the bead and get under that bridge, just like that. When you pull it in, it closes up the gap. And there you have it. Now I've got this little bead sitting kind of wonky right here, and what's going on there is that's where my bead frame was snapped up, loose and not completely soldered. So to work on that, I'm just going to go ahead and move through these beads that I just put in place in this row. And I'm just going to pull along like that and go through a few more. You guys don't have to do this part. It's not really necessary. But I'm going to do it just because I want to straighten up that little bead that was sitting just a little bit wonky right there. And I'm going to pull it just a little snug. And now I'm exiting from this bead. So what I need to do is dig under one of my thread bridges. So I'm just going to go poking around until I can get under a thread bridge and pull my needle through. Just like that. Now I pull nice and snug. It sets that bead a little bit better into place for me. Alright. So there's that step done. We're going to, it's optional if you want to add the beadwork to this side of the bead frame. I did it on this earring, but I'm going to do that later on in the project. That right now I'm going to go ahead and work towards creating the next row of beadwork, which is going to be this row of 11 seed beads along the outer edge of our 8 beads. So what I need to do in order to get into position is just look where my thread is exiting, which is right in here. And I'm going to go up through that 8 seed bead right there in the same spot that my thread is exiting. And I'll pull it up through there just like that. And that's going to pull my thread up into position to work on my next row. Alright, so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to put my raspberry beads away again. Get out my little black 11 opaque beads one more time. And we'll come back and we'll add this next row. Alright everyone, welcome back. I've got my little black 11 sitting out now, and I'm ready to start this next row of beads that are going to go along the outside edge of my 8 And once again, we're going to start by picking up 2 because we're starting another row of brick stitch. I'm going to drop those folks down there. We're right up against the beads. And when you're starting a second row on top of one row of brick stitch, we're going to be working with these thread bridges that we created, that are created along the outside edge of our first row. So we have our 2 beads on our thread. We're going to skip over this first thread bridge right here. We're going to go into the second one right here. Pull your thread through. It brings your beads down along the outside edge just like this. Take your needle and pass up through the bead. For me on the left, if you're right-handed, of course, it'll be to the right, and pull back up and outwards like that to set your bead into position so that it's standing up on the beadwork. Now, on this row, you're going to have to use a lot of judgment because our 11 C beads, obviously, are smaller than our 8 C beads, and we want to make sure that we're not leaving huge gaps in between these this new row of beads that we're adding. So it's probably best to go ahead and drop your bead down. So I'm picking up a bead and I'm dropping it down right here. And I'm letting it fall up against the beadwork right here, and I want to make sure which thread bridge I need to grab. Like, say for example, if I grab this bridge here, which is the next one over, and pull it through, I want to make sure that this bead is going to sit next to the black bead that's already in position right here. So it looks to me like it's not going to. It's going to leave too big of a gap, if you see what I'm saying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that back through. Pretty easy, just because we're working with the thread bridge here. It's not very difficult to get your needle back out. And that's a blessing. So what we'll do in this instance is we're going to use the same thread bridge we just used. So I'm going to go ahead and go back under that same thread bridge right there. And on this row, just because I've already made an earring, I know for a fact that you're going to have to do this several times in order to eliminate having any gaps. Now when I pass up through my bead, it sits into position nice and neat right next to the previous bead. And that's what we want. So now I can pick up another seed bead, and I can know I'm going to be using my next thread bridge. So I'm going to go ahead and go through that, under that thread bridge. Now I'm going to pass back up from bottom to top through the bead. And now it sits nicely next to the bead before it. And I'm just going to keep doing this all the way around, but I'll show you guys a couple of more just because I want you to understand fully about when to use the same thread bridge. So I'm going to drop this bead down. Here's my next bead. When I lay it down against the beadwork, I see that I'm okay using my next thread bridge. It shouldn't leave too much of a gap. And I'm correct. It doesn't. So I'm safe to pass back up through it and set the bead. Now this time, I can already tell that I'm going to need to use my same thread bridge again in order to not have a gap. Because here's my next thread bridge way over here. So I know I need to use the same thread bridge that I just used. And that's just how you know, when you're changing down to a smaller size bead, that's a step that you're going to have to take each time, is to determine, if you're going to have a huge gap or not. You'll just have to make sure that you're paying attention and go ahead and drop that bead down to double check things. Let's pick us another. I'll show you one more time. We'll go ahead and bring this one down. And when I lay it against the beadwork, I can see that I'm okay going through my next thread bridge. I'm not going to have a big gap. Set my bead. But this time, I can tell just by looking. We'll drop it down just to show you guys for sure how to look at it. I can tell that if I drop this bead down, if I jump way over here to this thread bridge, I'm going to be pulling my bead into a huge gap. So this time I want to use my same thread bridge I just used and back it up just a little bit like that. And there we go. So this time I know I can go ahead and just jump over to the next thread bridge. So now this time I'll drop one down just to double check. I'm going to drop it down. And I see that it's going to be pretty close. I can go ahead and use my next thread bridge right here. And I shouldn't have too much of a gap. Pull it up snug. And I'm just going to continue working like this until I've worked my way back around. And I'm going to stop when I get to this 8/0. I'm going to leave myself a pretty good space of room right here so I can determine if I need to, how many beads I need to add into that space. And then I'll be back. All right, guys, go ahead and add your little row of your 11-ohs. All right, so hi guys, I'm back. And I've worked myself around my little ring here and got my little 11-ohs put on. And I left myself a little bit of room so we could discuss about how to determine what you need to fill your final spaces. So I've got one bead on and I've dropped it down. Now I'm seeing that on this bead right here, I'm safe to go ahead and go under this next thread bridge, just like that. So go ahead and put that in. And take the next step and pass up through it and set the bead. So now I want to figure out if I have enough room for this to add one more bead. Obviously I've got a huge gap here. And I'm going to want to put another bead, because there's no way that I can close that gap without it. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up another 11-oh just like this on my needle. And I'm going to go ahead and pass under the same thread bridge that I just used. And pass back up through my bead. Pull it into position and snug it in. And now you can see I've closed that huge gap. So now when I straighten this bead, I'm going to pass right down through my very first bead. And then I'm going to pass up through the last bead that I added. You want to pull it all nice and tight. And I've closed my gap. And I've created my little thread bridge to close my beadwork. But I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come back down through that last bead one more time. And come up through that bead again. Just to make things look a little bit neater. And there we have it. And I've gotten that row finished. So now we're going to be adding our tilas. So what I've used to add the tila beads, I'm going to lay out a little bit of each of my seed beads. I'll need my black 11-ohs, my raspberries. We'll need a few of our 8-oh seed beads as well. So go ahead and get a few of those out and get your tilas out. And then we'll be able to come through and we're going to add this set of embellishment here. All right, we'll be right back.